Hi, I'm Tracy from Indigo Journey, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about overwhelm, the best practices for managing that overwhelm. And we're going to go a little bit beyond your standard self care practices today, but we will touch on some of those. So, if you're a parent of an LGBTQIA plus person and you're paying any attention at all to the media at the moment, regardless of where you live, I'm going to imagine that things are a little bit more stressful than they may have been in the past. It can be really difficult to hear all of the things that are coming up on the media. And I'm not going to talk about those today because you can get that information all over the place. And that's part of the problem, that it is everywhere. And it is making our lives quite difficult and quite challenging in some ways when we continue to hear all of the negativity and the challenges that are coming up. So, enough about that. What can we do about it? How can we manage that overwhelm is going to be the most important part of today's conversation. So, I'm a social worker, I'm a counselor, I'm a coach, and I like to prioritize supporting parents of LGBTQIA plus people because I know that all of you love your kids. You love them unconditionally and you want to do the best you can to support them. And sometimes it can be hard to know what that is. So we have conversations all about how to best support your kids on this channel. And my priority is to support you so you can show up as the best parent that you want to be so that your kids do well in the world and are able to manage some of the struggles that they may come up against, particularly in the current climate. What I wanted to share with you today is a little bit about what's inside my new book, It's About You Too. If you haven't seen it yet, here it is. It's About You Too, Reducing Overwhelm for Parents of LGBTQIA plus kids. So I'm going to touch on some of the things that are in there already and some extra things as well. So I think it's chapter 2, we talk about, or I introduce you to a parent named Alison. And one of the things for her is she's pretty supportive. She wants to be supportive of her child. She absolutely loves and adores her child before they came out, and of course continues to afterwards. However, she finds the news adds to her already existing overwhelm as a parent. And what she explained to me was that she felt that it kind of sent her over the edge a little bit. Like she was just managing with all of the things that she had to juggle as a parent before her child came out. And she knew that once she heard the news from her child, she knew that there was going to be extra appointments, extra discussions, extra pressures that she was struggling to know how to manage, and therefore felt that she maybe was not going to manage as well as what she would like to. Now, I wonder, does that sound familiar to you? If it does, keep listening. So, when I was working with Alison, what we did was at the very start was, rather than go into a lot of depth around sexuality and gender identity and what that means for her child and her family and all of that, we had a look at what was going on in her life more generally before her child came out. What was pushing her to her limits around the overwhelm, around the pressures, the responsibilities, the stress, the forever growing to-do list, so that we could reduce some of that overwhelm, some of the things that felt a little bit more approachable to her. And then we looked into more of the detail around sexuality and gender identity. So the first thing that we did after, having a bit of a discussion and me getting a bit more of a general idea around what her stressors were, was we did a bit of a writing activity, and I include this in my book as well. I won't go into detail with it today because you can find it in my book. And, I work with parents with this activity quite regularly, but I'll give you a bit of an overview of what that was. And basically what we did was wrote down all of the things that she felt was contributing to her overwhelm. And when we wrote that list out, it's not just about, dumping a bunch of things on a piece of paper, because what we tend to do is leave out, when we do an activity like this, is leave out all of the extra little bits. And often it's the extra little bits that are the ones that really create the overwhelm. Like the big things, often we can't do a lot about those. Sometimes we can, but they're obvious. It's the little things or the medium things that tend to send us over the edge, or they accumulate, meaning that we feel like we're stretched every single day. And often when people feel like they're stretched every single day, they feel like they don't have time for any of the I guess, traditional self-care activities that a lot of us health professionals talk about and encourage you to make sure you include in your day. It can feel like that's just another thing on your list and it's not approachable. So, what did we do? We created this list, and then the trick to this list is to ask, and what else? So once Alison told me, yep, I finished my list, and I had a look at her list and I was like, and what else? And she's like, what do you mean? And I said, well, there's a bunch of things on there, and I can imagine that makes you feel really busy, but I feel like there might be some things missing. Let's spend a moment to think about that, and let's look at the smaller things, not just the big things. And so she took a moment, and of course, she added another probably 10 things to her list in that moment. I had another look at her list, she reviewed her list, and then I asked the question again, and what else? And she looked at me kind of baffled, like, I've just written another 10 things. And I'm like, we just want to make sure that you've captured everything that you have on your to-do list, everything that you feel responsible for, everything that you're doing that doesn't even make it to your to-do list, making sure it is on your list now. And of course, you can probably guess, she added another, I don't know, I think it was like 6 or 7 things to that list. And I think I could have kept asking her for the next 20 minutes, and what else, and she would have continued to add. But we stopped there, and then she went through the list to explore what was hers, what was necessary for her to do. And you might be able to start to get a sense of where I'm going here. And you're probably right. We started exploring, what was necessary to be done and what was necessary for her to do. Because there are a lot of things that you're doing, I am sure, that it doesn't have to be you that does them. And sometimes we just need to let go of that sense of perfection or sense of responsibility, a little bit at least, so that you can start to share some of those responsibilities, some of those tasks. We can fast forward a little bit in that conversation with Alison, and what we spoke about was who else can do some of these things. And when she initially went through that list, she was like, I have to do that, I have to do that, I have to do it. No one else can do that, no one else can. Well, who else could I ask? She said. And of course, I'd only met her once or twice before, so I didn't know the answer to that question, but I knew that she did. An example that I can remember of her being adamant that there was no one else that could drive her children to their after school activities was because her husband worked later hours, and so he was unable to help out. And so let me give you, actually, before I go any further, let me give you a bit of a snapshot of Alison's family's life and their experience. So both her and her husband worked full-time hours. Her husband and her three children all had a fair amount of extracurricular activities. So they all played at least one sport. The three kids all played a musical instrument and had lessons in those musical instruments. And they all had pretty healthy social lives. They also had, so Alison's parents and her husband's parents both required some extra care and assistance. And for one of the parents, they required quite a bit of extra care and support. Alison and her husband were the closest kids or adult kids that were there to support the parents. And so they had the responsibility of parents, aging parents. They had the responsibility of three kids. They had lots of social interactions and sporting activities, as well as your normal everyday school and work. And Alison's husband did work later hours most days of the week, and sometimes in the office and sometimes at home. And Alison was the same, sometimes in the office and sometimes at home. And so what she felt was she couldn't ask anybody else for help to drive the kids to their extracurricular activities because her husband was working late. So her initial, thought is, well, that's my responsibility and my husband's responsibility, which is true. And he can't, so it has to be me. And so we looked into that a little bit further and had some conversations. And of course, what we discovered is there is such a thing as carpooling. And there are other parents in her community who are in similar situations where there is one parent or one person taking on the majority of the commuting between school and extracurricular activities and home again. And so what we did was a little bit of a brainstorm around, what parents do you already have relationships with? What do you know about their existence? And, funnily enough, she had a couple of parents in different different spaces around the kids' activities that she had spoken to in the past who spoke about the stresses of exactly the same as what she's experiencing. So really, really important in their family values for the kids to be involved in different sports and different activities, and also struggling with the pressures of trying to get them there. Rosters change and all of the different things that come up. And so I asked Alison, how would it be for you to ask one of those parents if it would be helpful for them to share the driving? The kids all went to the same schools or schools close by, and there was at least one parent in every circle of those sporting experiences and the music. I keep saying sport because that's what my kids and my life was mostly involved in. But I asked her, what would it be like to ask them, or if they could do with some extra support? And it was like a light bulb moment for her. She was like, well, it would be, I guess, a little bit uncomfortable to ask them for help, but it wouldn't be that uncomfortable to ask them if they could do with some support. So fast forward again, what she did was she went and had some conversations with some parents in some of the kids' activities and did exactly that. She asked them, how would it be for them if they had some extra support? Would it be helpful for them if they had some extra support transporting kids to and from sport, etc.? And what that turned into was a carpooling arrangement where she would pick up other people's kids and take them to their sports, and they would return the favor. She was also able to have the conversation with her husband about the pressures around trying to manage all of these things. And he said, well, on the days that I work from home, I can take an hour or an hour and a half off, whatever the time schedule would be, and just work a little bit later. So he had some flexibility around his time that he could also help out. So, I mean, they are just a couple of things, and you'll read more in my book about the different things that I helped Alison with. But that made a huge difference, because it meant that, one parent would drop off and the other parent would pick up. And that meant that they didn't have to sit and watch the practice every single time. And of course, they all of the parents really enjoyed watching and supporting their kids in their games and in their practice, but they didn't have to be there every single time for the whole game. It might be that she would drop off one of her kids at their sports and watch the first half of the game, and then she could go off and do some grocery shopping or some other things that she needed to do, or go for a walk and do some of those self-care things that um, you will hear me talk about lots over the next little while. So that was one of the things that she was able to do. Some of the other things she was able to do was looking at household chores, household tasks. When she would spend 15 minutes whipping around the house every evening before she went to bed, picking up all the bits and pieces that everybody had left around. And I know that you can recognize that. And, what that meant for her was that she would be tired and exhausted, try and sit on the couch and relax, but she couldn't relax properly because she knew that she would have to, still do some household chores. And so what she started doing was, 10 or 15 minutes before the kids went to bed, they did a whip around of their own things and picked up some of their things and popped them where they belonged. And so then her 15 minutes or so before she went to bed turned into 5 minutes. And over time, it actually turned into a non-event, because her and her husband had an agreement that they would just put things away after themselves beforehand, and the kids were picking up after themselves before bed, so there was some extra time. And that 15 minutes she spent, once she had gone and got herself ready for bed, she sat in bed and read for 15 minutes and was able to wind down and calm her nervous system so that she got a much better sleep. So that's just a few little snippets of things that I work with parents around, reducing that overwhelm before you even address the overwhelm or the stresses, the fears, the worries, the concerns that may have come up for you when your child has come out. So maybe that might be a more approachable place to address first for you. I'd love to hear from you and let me know, is that something that you have already done? How did it go for you? And if not, is it something that you feel is approachable for you? If you want to hear more about these types of conversations and topics, then I would love for you to subscribe and, of course, like this video. And I would also really appreciate you sharing this video with anyone that you know that might really benefit. Take care, and I look forward to talking to you soon. Bye for now.